Hello, my name is Rebecca Simon. On behalf of the Cinnamon production, I'd like to welcome all our viewers. This show will be posted on Facebook pages of the Cinnamon production and Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari for Congress 2020 and on YouTube and other websites. Today, on this April 24th, I would like to commemorate the genocide of the Assyrians, Armenians, and Greeks. In the World War I, we had a lot of martyrs, and we'd like to remember them today. Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari was born in 1969 in the predominantly Assyrian Christian city of Urmi, Iran. His father, Coolidge Sangari, was a physics professor, and his mother, Flora, was a school teacher. In 1980, the Sangari family migrates to the United States, and later Sargis Sangari obtains his bachelor's degree in political science from DePaul University. In 1994, Sargis Sangari enlists in the Army, and 20 years later, he retires as a lieutenant colonel. He then establishes his think tank by the name of Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, and his not-for-profit organization by the name of United Assyrian Appeal. He is currently the Republican nominee for U.S. Congress for Illinois District 9. He lives in Skokie, Illinois, with his wife Helen and their 4 children. Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari, welcome to our show, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Rebecca, the pleasure is mine. It's wonderful to be here. Special thanks also to Sim Production for giving us this opportunity. As you stated in your earlier comments, today is the Armenian genocide recognition. Of course, at the same time, in the first genocide of 20th century, Assyrians, to the tune of 750,000, were butchered by the Ottoman Turks and the Kurds, who were at that time the Kurdish tribesmen who were helping them, and also the Pontus Greeks. And also, let's not forget that we also had a celebration just a few days apart, and we call it a celebration, but it's really a remembrance of the martyrs who have died. Also, the European Jews that lost their lives in the Holocaust, specifically. So our Judeo-Christian communities living in the Middle East and all over the world have suffered to an extent.
Yes, and we shall never forget. Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari, these are very difficult times, unprecedented in modern history with the pandemic. And under these circumstances, it's extremely difficult to campaign for a political office. Now, you've had an added challenge of late, and that has been your URL's technical problems. Would you please tell us what happened and how you have taken steps to remedy it?
Oh, look, it's difficult, as you said. Everybody's staying at home. But today, right now, is not time for campaigning anyway. I know we will talk about the campaign during this interview. I will answer any questions asked. But however, as far as going door to door right now, is we have to practice social distancing, make sure that safety of people and their lives are much more important than what the politicians want to do when it comes to the 2020 election. With that said, because everything has turned towards people working from home, to include major news networks, our site, the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, the nec-se.com, has had problems this past week because the WordPress.com major servers have been under attacks from hackers. So we've had to change to a nec-se.net, our backup server, to use that, and we're hoping that we could get our servers back online again sometime soon, within the next few days. Even today, we had to file a Federal Bureau of Investigation report, which is a IC3 report, in order to make sure that we're able to protect our assets and requirements is difficult for the family members. Even at home, our kids were using Zoom to communicate, and Zoom itself was hacked recently, and it's given us some problems to be able to do distance learning and at-home education. So it's part of the process. It is a reality of today's world, and but we're trying to do our best to be able to survive within it.
I don't think the Cold War was as painful as this war of some sorts that we're going through right now.
No, it
Lieutenant
wasn't.
Colonel,
I'm
yes.
sorry, Rebecca. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to give our Assyrian audience a background, a very interesting historical account of your family. And that is that your family is somewhat connected to the family of the Simcoe, who was a Kurdish rebel who killed our patriarch and his followers. Could you briefly tell us what that connection is?
Just a historical connection. We're not connected to the Simcoe family, and God hoping nobody's ever connected to the individual who killed the patriarch of our church. With
Absolutely.
that said, though, there's a story there. As you know, we're recognizing the first genocide of the 20th century, where really our patriarch was the only really global leader that was killed in the process of execution of the war, which was the First World War. Uh, this this individual was, of course, tracked down. Simcoe, who was a Kurdish terrorist from the Syrian perspective, was tracked down by the Persian officer uh, in on behest of the Persian king, where he was killed during the process of his arrest. His wife, who was at that time carrying his daughter, was brought back to Iran, and during the year of the government trying to decide what they wanted to do with his wife, eventually the officer who had brought her back at the request of that officer's mom married her, took her as a wife, and the Assyrian communities in Iran always lived in these kind of communal locations, and one of the houses that was rented to this officer ended up being a house that my grandfather owned and was rented to them. So there's a picture where we see the wife of Simcoe, the officer who killed him, and his daughter, Simcoe's daughter, with my aunts and relatives interacting for a photo. And years later, when the Kurdish leadership, the Jalal Talabani side of the house, came in, surrounded the city, it was at that time where this lady, Simcoe's daughter, found out that actually what she thought was her real dad was actually the individual who had killed her dad in the process of their arrest. So the Kurds took her from there. She married into the Kurdish Jalal Talabani clan, and the rest is history, as we know.
This is an absolutely significant story for Assyrians all over the world who are very much familiar and affected by the Simcoe story. Your family has a pedigree of military people. Can you tell me some of the family members who have served in the military, in the law enforcement, and other fire department or other places like that?
Yeah, look, our family has always been connected to service. Most Assyrians globally have. One thing I'm proud of when it comes to the Assyrian people, regardless of the country they've served in, and we are in 43 different countries throughout the globe, and regardless of the time we've served, never has been where an Assyrian has been named as a traitor to the nation that they have served, regardless of which nation that is. During the Iran-Iraq War, Assyrians died on both sides of the fence fighting each other during that battle because they served the nations that they were part of. And a lot of those Syrians from Iraq, we know for a fact, were majority of them, 60 some percent of them, were shot in the back by the same people that they were fighting to defend. So that was the reality of the Syrians. But for my family, for me, I've had my uncle, who's actually my youngest son, carries his middle name, was supposed to be the first person to ever jump out of an aircraft, the first paratrooper for the Iranian government. He trained all the other paratroopers getting ready for that jump, and of course, the decision was made by the king at that time, because he was an Assyrian, and he was not he was a Christian Assyrian, not a Persian Muslim, that he would not be the first one out the door. So my uncle ended up being on the first chalk, but he didn't jump out until after everyone else had taken the credit, but he did train them. Same thing, I've had uncles in the U.S. military who served in the Korean War. Uncle John, who actually was a police department, Chicago Police Department officer, retired. And at the same time, I've had a uncle of mine, a cousin, but because they're older, we call them uncle in our tradition, who served in the Vietnam, in an Annapolis graduate. And my own sister was the first Assyrian American to ever become a fire department paramedic with the Chicago Fire Department. If people remember, there used to be a writer who wrote the Cups column for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he actually mentions her as being the first one recognition. She retired at the same time I did in 2014. I myself have served 20 plus years in the U.S. Army, infantry and special operational forces with a diplomatic mission in Kuwait, 6 years of continuous combat ops. And I have cousins and other relatives who are currently serving in the police department. Raymond Powley is a cousin of mine. He serves with Wilmette Police Department. And I have a lot of brothers and sisters, as I call them, who are part of the Legion of St. Michael law enforcement community, which I am a member of and international representative of. And of course, these are police and firefighters from all over Chicago and all over the country. We have various different chapters, include international chapters in Italy, who are serving as first responders. So it's always been there to tradition, and I think that it's one of the most wonderful things you could do, which is to serve your nation, both in military and also as a first responder.
Thank you for your service, and also for the service of your family members to our nation and to other nations as they live there. Going back to your comment about the Assyrians' loyalty to their native country, I'd like to add that the world has yet to see an Assyrian terrorist coming out of the Middle East. I just would like to add that comment. Lieutenant Colonel, you have been in the military for 20 years. You have been in the toughest countries, battles, situations. What kind of injuries have you sustained in 6 years of deployment and in the overall 20 years in your military?
I would say what type of injuries I have not sustained. I think this portion of my finger is good. Everything else has been fractured or destroyed. It's hard being an infantry officer in special operation forces. I've had from head to toe multiple injuries. I've sustained skull fractures, brain contusions, broken eye sockets, broken nose. My first deployment, just a week prior to us leaving, when we were getting ready for our final departure, I broke my nose on my first deployment, and that was probably one of the toughest deployments we were on. Hard to breathe out of a broken nose while you're doing combat operations in Western Al-Anbar with my Alpha team. When I was really severely injured, I was recovering from injuries in Chicago. A couple of things happened. If I hadn't been injured, I wasn't in Chicago, I would have never met my wife, Helen, currently, which I'm married to. But at the same time, it was severe injuries where I couldn't even remember what the letter R looked like. I didn't know what a paperclip was, but I fought to stay in. They were trying to medically board me out of the military, but I fought two medical boards. I remember the last piece that they had me do just to make sure that I could still run was to be able to pass a physical fitness test with the U.S. Army. And I was still so bad that I would have to close my eyes sometimes just to run in a straight line, get my balance back up. And for a couple of years, I could taste that blood in my mouth, which was probably more psychological than realistic of what was happening physically in my body. But I passed that test just to stay in so we could deploy and fight. It is what you have to do to serve your nation. And the ones who should get the credit and the ones that are always in my prayers and the ones that my heart goes out to are the young men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice. So those are the heroes that really are the ones that touch our hearts, and those are the individuals that I always will remember, will continue to carry in my heart as I move forward in my life, and make sure my sons and daughters are reminded of their sacrifices that have allowed us to live the life we do today.
You are as tough as a nail, and most people would agree. But so is the district you're running in, 9th District in Illinois. It's been in the Democratic hands since 1949. Your opponent, who is the incumbent, has been in there for 20 years. In the last election in 2018, she won her district, her seat, by almost 70%. What makes you think you can unseat this longtime Democrat in a very deep blue district?
Well, some people say that you're tough as nails. Others would call it crazy. But look, I'm fighting here because majority of my people that I have from my community live here. So I fight where I live. If we just chose to fight easy fights, we would never have a country. If the Americans during the Revolutionary War said, well, we're only going to fight the fight that we can win, we would have never had a country. For 71 years, as you said, the district has been under the control of 3 Democrats, and they've owned it. People ask me, why aren't you running in other districts? I said, because it's where I live. This is where I need to fight for the rights to represent our folks in the district. This district has been gerrymandered a number of times, and I will tell you again, the numbers that you see about how many times she's won her specific vote is misleading, because it's not her winning because people like her. She constantly loses votes. 1/3 of the people don't even like to vote for her. What happens when you gerrymander a district, the representatives select the voters that are supposed to vote for them. So because a lot of voters get tired of these individuals who are incumbent or stuck in their part of the machine, when the machine realizes that they're starting to lose votes, they redraw the district, and they're going to redraw the district again after the 2020 election because people don't like her. So in this case, the representative chooses the people who vote for her, not the people choosing who should be their representative. So it's kind of a shell game. It's and especially in Chicago, the problem you have years ago when the deal was made by the Democratic Party with the union, saying that here's what we're going to do. You're going to have to be our ground game army to get the vote out for us, but we'll try to do something as far as giving you the benefits or giving the voice that you're looking for. They trapped the union into a legal document that the union has to abide by. What is that? We'll take care of your pensions, is in the Illinois Constitution, that even today, if you try to help the state government because of what we're facing with the coronavirus, the first dollars that come in have to go to pay those pensions, which is the reason it's been written that way, so that the politician, in this case on the Democratic side, can entrap the union guys who have to vote for them and work for them. And because we're a open primary, the union folks have to go and vote Democratic. If they don't pick up a Democratic ballot and they pick up a Republican ballot, it looks bad, and it will be addressed by the union lead. So it's a way that you redraw the district, say these are the people who are going to vote for me, because I'm going to have my own echo chamber to support me, and then I'm going to force the union guys to have to pick up a Democratic ballot. So those numbers are skewed. A lot of them are just not accurate numbers.
About
If
how
there were
many
accurate numbers, go ahead.
Assyrians do you have in your district? Do you know?
The Assyrians are probably looking at 150,000 that
In
are
your
within
district
the
alone?
district. The majority of them, I would say, the numbers you're not going to be accurate on, because the numbers have to go back to the previous census. But we have a understanding from what we've looked at the churches that are in our district. The largest number of churches that we have really are set around my district for the Assyrian church. So we're looking at probably around 150,000 just in the larger Chicago area.
What would be your message to the Assyrians in your district who want to vote for you? Why they should vote for you? What would you do for Illinois, for your country, and for your Assyrian constituency in specific?
Well, my thing would my uh, encouragement to them would be the same thing I've said to the Korean community when I stood on stage, same thing I've said to the Indian community and all the other communities of color. I said, if you really want to have a representative, you have to have your own folks there. Look, if you take our district, you take it between the Armenians, the Indians, the blacks, the Hispanics, the Asians, the Koreans, the Assyrians, you're looking at almost close to 43+% of the voting base. But for 71 years, that minority voting base has not had a one representative to represent that minority base. Why? Because the people who control the power in Illinois, both at the federal level in the ninth and also the Springfield that controls it, never ever allow a minority or person of color to be able to move forward in the ninth. So this has been the reality for us. And I always say, I hear a lot from folks from the other end of the aisle. As you know, I'm a Republican uh, nominee running here, that we care about minorities, we care about people of color, we care about ethnicities, we care about immigrants. Well, if you care, then why are you, again, for 20 years having the same individual who is not a person of color controlling this district and trying to knock out somebody who is a person of color who represents those communities? We initially have to have a voice. And I think if you take 1/3 of all these ethnic communities and that 1/3 of the voting base that just does not like this incumbent and do not like incumbents at all, regardless of the party they're from, you get a 2/3 vote there. You just have to have a good, credible candidate in front of you. Unfortunately, as we are dealing with this COVID situation, as I also told you right now, we have a hard time even on social media, because social media does stop any information going out as far as conservative candidates are concerned. So it's a hard fight, but it's a fight that I'm ready to take on. That's why I'm in it.
What is your opinion about how our country has handled the lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And when do you think the country should start getting some sort of normalcy and allowing people to gradually go back to work?
Look, I think you need to practice social distancing. I think, you got to listen to your medical experts. I said this almost now 4 weeks ago when I first said, we got to work with our governors, our mayors, our federal government leads, and we got to keep them in our prayers and try to do the best we can. Now, everything that's come out of our medical professionals has changed. There's some things I agree with, there's some things I don't. But I think one thing I would like to say here, Rebecca, is that these blanket orders, I think, is what's causing the issues for within our community. The blanket orders that you're seeing that are being issued by the governors and the mayors are unconstitutional on their face value. The constitutional violations that we are dealing with are including the First Amendment, right of speech, religion, and assembly. You're looking in some instances where people are now out there protesting around the country where They have closed gun shops to include here in Illinois, which is a violation of the Second Amendment rights that we have. As far as police entering onto private property to enforce social distancing, that has happened in some houses by itself, that enforcements are absent of a warrant, and even stopping someone on the street are violation of the Fourth Amendment, and there's violations against unreasonable search and seizure that fall into those categories. So there are also Fifth Amendment issues regarding the taking of private property that has happened, and this falls into the freedom, initiatives that we have in this country that we don't want to violate, and even some of these orders that are covered under the privileges and immunities clauses of the Constitution. So doing all this under various executive orders raises also due process of law that are covered under the Fifth and the 14th Amendment that become an issue for us. So look, as I have said many times, and I've said this, I said we need to support our governors and mayors, but this is a problem with politicians, and there's a reason I'm running. Don't fake your authorities if you don't have it. I am staying at home. I'm telling my kids to stay at home. I'm limiting my exposure. I only go out when I have to for certain requirements. But I'm doing it because I'm going to help. I'm volunteering. I'm trying to help you out. But when you start saying that I can go down the aisle to pick up food, but I cannot go down the same aisles in the same store to pick up a paint can to paint my house or my room, it just becomes ridiculous. So
and not buy tomato seeds.
The myriad of the
plant.
constitutional violations that are now taking place are unprecedented, and we have to address these. Look, I understand what we're dealing with, but we have to do it as a team. And I always say to the politicians, just because they give you a little bit doesn't mean you take it all. And eventually, I think most of these issues are going to be dealt with as far as the courts are concerned. So there's no right or wrong answer about it. If you are pulled over by the police or you're asked to do something, do it, and then deal with it in the course afterwards.
China. It's been some time that our politicians have been saying, beware of China. But now with the COVID-19, there's more focus on China. And even now, as the pandemic pulls through with force around the world, China is taking advantage of this and is wreaking havoc in South China Sea and the Vietnamese fish boat. They hammered that and killed everybody. And those who want to extract oil, they don't allow them. The U.S. Navy ships are in the area, Australian Navy ships. Now, how do we reduce the influence of China so that it will not be more rogue than it is, and it will not be the evil power that it could be, according to some who sees it that way?
Oh, look, China's been doing this for a long time. China has had two plans. It's had a 100-year plan and a 50-year plan, and majority of it has been published. We just don't read. Our leadership just doesn't read when the enemy says, I'm going to do something to you. Eventually, you got to understand when the enemy cocks that gun back, aims it at your head and says, I'm going to kill you, that their plan is to kill you. In 2015, I knew that China was going to be a problem. I stood on stage in Japan during an anti-terrorism brief and talked about what China is trying to do within the region. The problem is we're inconsistent when it comes to our policies across administrations. The previous administration, under the Obama administration, they wanted to pull out of the Middle East, but they wanted to shift and focus on South America. The current administration under President Trump, we still want to pull out of the Middle East, but his focus is in Southeast Asia because he understands you got to check China. When I came back from my time in Japan in 2015, we published on the Near East an article that was called the New Power Relations. And this particular article looked at how it's affecting the Middle East crisis, because at the same time, we were helping the Assyrian armed forces fighting in both Iraq, Syria during the most current genocide that the Assyrians had to go through. So on October 6th of that year, 8 months after I returned from Japan, I made a presentation that looked at what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is doing, which is led by China itself, and what the previous administration was looking at doing in support to an extent of what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was trying to do within the Middle East and globally. And part of it was when we initially looked at where we wanted to be with China. We knew that their organization had established a counter to basically NATO. So it was a bad guy of NATO, for a better term. And for those who don't know who the SCO is, it's an intergovernmental organization that is funded through Shanghai, China. It was established in June 2001. And the SCO currently compromises of 8 major member states. You look at China, even India, our ally that we're using to check China as part of the SCO. And then some of the southern Caucasus states, Russia is in there, Pakistan is in it, all the global strategic locations for China to expand. And then as we go through, Iran is a member of it. We mentioned even the Armenian genocide. Armenia is a member that is trying to be a region member with the SCO because they're trying to control the Southern Caucasus. So look, in September of 2012, we wrote in that article that the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at that time gave a speech at the Brookings Institute in which he presented China's vision of a future and an address that he had titled on New Power Relations. So if people go to our site, and the future, or today's site that we have operating, which is at necsc.net, they could read through the article that was posted. And according to Wang Yi's statement at that time, he said that China's interests and the U.S.'s interests were clearly divergent. That means he said that we're going in 2 different directions. And this would enable the 2 nations, the vision that China had, to be able to work together rather than be in friction points where we're going to be in conflict and lead to global war. Now, in his concept, which he called the New Power Relations, he said it's very necessary that for U.S. to really abide by China's vision of what it wants to do within their region. Otherwise, we're going to lead to war in the next century. Now, of course, the regions that he was talking about, all the regions that U.S. has ceded, because we agreed under the previous administration to that concept, China is using the barrel of the gun to basically rule over those regions based on what Beijing wants, the Communist Party. So
what's our role here? What should we do so that China, because it's not even listening to the International Court in Hague, and it is taking over the waterways of, I believe, Philippines, even though the court ruled that Philippines has the right over the waters. What is our role as superpower? What is it that we need to do to make sure that China does not go any further than it has? What do we do?
Well, the only way you could do it, you're going to have that red line, and you're going to have to go against them as we're doing. Look, I think the current POTUS has looked at how to counter China, and I would say look at what we're dealing with. Today, China is holding our manufacturing base. This is a manufacturing base that we built for China. They've taken our money, built their factories. They send their individuals that are tied to the Chinese government here to get educated. We use our money to give them grants to educate them. They go back to China and they create the new economic or military ways to defeat us. So for us, if you want to defeat them, it's very simple. Gut their manufacturing base. Move it outside of China. Move it to countries that are like-minded like you. The reason why China can work with Iran, because they're like-minded. Iran is a dictatorship. It wants to export its ideology to others. China is a dictatorship that wants to export its ideology to others. So these 2 groups come together. China uses Iran to be able to be all over the Middle East without having to be physically in the Middle East. It uses Iran as an influencer. How does it do it? Iran gives oil to China. China turns around and says, I'm going to give you influence in international courts or internationally. They use the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to move money around in order for them to be able to continue buffering against American interests. Take that manufacturing base, put it in countries that are like-minded like us, our allies, help develop them, and bring the things that we need to develop us for long-term security. I, as a military guy, should not be reliant on drugs from China coming in to take care of me if I'm injured on a battlefield somewhere. All those things need to be brought in here. I think finally this pandemic has shown how China has controlling interests on us. So for us to break that, this is the best way to do it, beat them economically.
Yes, weaning off of the Chinese cheap and abundant production will be a long and painful process, but it's something that we need to look at and perhaps realize that we need to go through some periods of pain for benefits in the long run. Lieutenant Colonel, I'd like to ask you about some other issues, and I'd like your brief opinions on these issues. The deficits. We have trillions of dollars of deficit, and with the stimulus that is just going on, $2 trillion at a time, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in short intervals. How do we take control of that? What do you think it needs to be done to not create any more deficits, because the future generation is in jeopardy as we pack on these deficit dollars?
Stop wasting money where you don't have money. Don't spend the money you don't have. That's the first thing we learn. Unfortunately, we have put ourselves in this position. Look, let me tell you how dangerous it is when you have a deficit. Under the previous administration, in 2014, October of 2014, Japan bought a lot of our debt. We just didn't have the capability to protect ourselves, even though the previous administration had agreed with China with their vision of how China and U.S. can work together on the global stage. As soon as Japan bought our debt, Russia used that to leverage against us. What did they do? They moved into Syria. Russia for 100 years has had the same plan, going back to Tsar Alexander to today, Putin's ideology, where they wanted our war water ports. They have them today. They have two of them. And they're very well entrenched in Syria. How did they get there? It's very simple. As soon as they realized Japan has to buy our debt because we're about to fall economically, they basically told their Chinese brethren who on the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, put pressure on Japan through North Korea. At that time, if you remember, North Korea was threatening to launch missiles and launched attacks and possibly be able to use its nuclear ballistic capability against Japan. That's how the previous administration was stuck. It knew that if it tries to go into Syria as Russian troops moved in, that it was going to be used buffer against them. So basically, because we didn't have the dollars or the capability to extend ourselves to be able to be a global lead again, it put us in a position where we are today dealing with these messes. There were the SCO is reaching everywhere, has dollars, can give money for the Iran nuclear program we don't have. How do you get there? Stop wasting money. Don't waste it on programs that don't operate. If you're going to use it, use the dollars in the wise ways to protect ourselves. Look, I mean, we're dealing with a pandemic. We've established bureaucracies that did not know a pandemic was going to hit us. And this is our reaction to it now today, to take $2 trillion and infuse it into our economy. These are the things that have to be done prior to the pandemic hitting us. And if you know that you're going back to 2013, and even prior to that, 2005, and you got the Chinese working within their virology labs, the P4 lab, talking about that we're going to work with bat DNAs to be able to see how we could use coronavirus in those bat DNAs, because in the future we may want to use these as a future bioweapon for our advantages. This is the problem you start dealing with. I think first you got to get people in Congress who are willing to work across the aisle. They're not just interested in promoting a political party. They're interested in an American long-term vision. And then once you get there, you're able to focus. You could go administration to administration supporting those long-term visions to get us to a place where we are no longer dependent on others and we are actually a global lead.
Most Republicans have long argued for having a strong border, having a controlled immigration system, and bringing in people with skills that the United States needs, not just anyone coming in here. And with the pandemic, I think some people have been more open to the idea of a stronger border control and a better immigration system. What is your opinion about having a revamping our immigration system and spending more dollars controlling our border?
Well, look, I'm an immigrant. I came here legally to this country and became a part of the fabric of the nation. I've served my country in combat. And I've had friends who were immigrants just like me who came here legally and died on the battlefields for this nation. We have to come to a realization that today is not 20th century, we're in a new century. And what may have operated and what been norm years ago is not norm today. I mean, there's not one individual in Congress today who leaves their doors open when they go to Congress. I mean, wide open. I'm not talking about, you don't lock it. It's like open. Not one person drives their car, parks it somewhere, and doesn't lock the doors. So I don't understand why people think that if you keep the doors for this nation open, that fully open, that people are not going to come through it. And yes, there's individuals who are trying to come here for a better life, but there's also a lot of people who see that as an opportunity and make money through it. Whether it be the human traffickers, who on average are bringing in approximately, almost 20,000 women to be human trafficked in this country. Imagine the current incumbent's been here for 20 years. If you take that 20,000, those are the individuals we know about, and you take that and you times it by that number, you're in the 400,000 people that are part of the fabric of our nation that were just brought in here to be human trafficked by those coyotes and people who make money in it. I was on the battlefields of Iraq, and we knew that this network that was ISIS, once we defeated them, would move into Europe as they have done now and would start working with illegal trades in order to make money. There's an article we wrote on the Near East talking about how ISIS is connected to the Italian mafia and how they're also now connected to the drug cartel in the South and how they move stuff in and out. So it's important to have a secure border. I'd rather have somebody come to my door and ring the doorbell and me make a decision whether or not they should be allowed to come in or not, rather than just leave it open and have anybody who wants to come in. And a lot of those are bad actor networks that are coming in.
Yes.
So it's a matter of just doing the smart things, the common sense things. But unfortunately, common sense doesn't apply in Washington often.
Well, the common sense is treat your country, your borders as your home, and treat the immigrants as your guests. And with that, Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari, we wish you all the best in your campaign and in your run for office. And I hope that you can join us again in the future and update us.
I will do. And our prayers go out to not just our first responders who are on the front line fighting in this fight, but at the same time, to all the families out there. Look, right now, everybody's concerned about their lives. Nobody wants to see somebody come knock on their door and say, hey, vote for me on November 3rd. But the reality is that we're going to get there one day. It's going to be a shorter, time for us to run. We just got to get people to Washington that can help fix some of the friction points that we have today. You're not going to get that out of the incumbents. Just a reality of it.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel. Best wishes to you.
Thank you. God bless.
Nope, stay here, stay here. He's gonna cover that angle. You're gonna have to go through this area. He's just gonna cover that angle. Go after him, let him go. Yeah, that lighting him up pretty good. Good job.
น้องด้วยติดขาตัวประกันของเราแล้วก็ขาเอาลงเอาได้เลย
Okay, currently the Thai police instructors for EOD are establishing various different booby traps in this type of urban training environment. And there's 5 objectives for today's mission. This is one of the culminating events for Raymond's Challenge, where EOD and SWAT work together in order to be able to resolve an issue and achieve an objective.
Lieutenant Colonel Sangari had 6 years of continuous combat deployment, 144 patrols, 22 Special Forces missions, and 2 key direct action operations. He survived 7 improvised explosive attacks and 1 enemy checkpoint engagement with no loss of life, and was awarded the Combat Action Badge for the operations. He conducted 670 key leader and tribal leader engagements in support of multiple counterinsurgency operations to counter enemy influence and terrorist activities in the region. He wrote 3 major policy papers for the Special Operations Forces and the Marines on federalism and governance, and he wrote an executive summary on civil military operations. These documents were used as a guideline for conducting civil engagements in Iraq. The policies legitimized 3 newly elected city councils and 2 mayors in Al-Anbar province to counter enemy influence, which directly allowed a new approach in support of the Sons of Iraq efforts in Iraq. Lieutenant Colonel Sangari has also conducted over 17,000 civil military operations, foreign internal defense support operations, non-combat evacuations, and disaster relief and emergency management missions. He conducted over 7,000 humanitarian missions to mitigate citywide emergencies covering provincial and regional shortfalls throughout the Middle East in support of unconventional warfare, irregular warfare, direct action, and contingency operations. Lieutenant Colonel Sangari planned, resourced, and executed the reception and integration of military personnel from the U.S. Army, North Atlantic Treaty Organization executive officers, and well-known civilian interagency personnel from 6 different U.S. civilian agencies, thus laying the groundwork for coordinating reconstruction and development activity cells for operations in Afghanistan. His Specialist Skills Initiative became a pilot and a case study for how the Army recruits, trains, and conducts future civil military operations in both accessible and remote areas of the world. The last 2 major projects which Lieutenant Colonel Sangari took on were the analysis, designs, and developments of metrics and standards used to accredit the United States Special Warfare Center and School in both training and education, to include assessments and accreditation of the training which affected all civil affairs, special forces, psychological operations, and other special units personnel totaling between 15 to 20,000.
Black 5, this is Lima 3, it's to the left for the median to the right, thanks. Just see what happens next. White. Hello. Lima 3.
As an American, when I was young, I wondered, as a child wonders, what should I do when I grow up? My parents raised me with the love of my nation in my heart. There's a voice in some people's lives which calls out, be a soldier. It is that time when a man or a woman sees a need to stand taller. Remember the system mistakes. Debate the issue. Challenge my proposals and any proposals I put on the table. Hold your leadership accountable. Don't just believe what they say, verify and validate what they say. The onus is on you. You want me to be a better leader? You better put the scope in my chest, and you better be asking the tough questions. Americans have always been ready because we always respond. We do not shrink away from fear, but we walk towards our adversary.